Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
With more and more satellites being launched into space, there are increasing concerns about the number of defunct satellites that become space debris. Part of the problem is that satellites have a finite lifespan, and finding ways to extend the life of existing satellites could help reduce the amount of space junk cluttering low Earth orbit. My guest on this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast is Andrew Rush, President and CEO of Starcatcher, a company that hopes to establish the first energy grid in space. And Andrew, thanks for joining me on the program today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. Let's talk first just about the company a little bit and its mission.
Absolutely. So Starcatcher was founded to build the world's first power grid in space, to give satellites more power, higher concentrations of power, and even power in eclipse. Because we're going in low Earth orbit from a few thousand satellites to, by the end of the decade, 50,000 satellites, and by the end of 2040, maybe even 100,000 satellites. That represents an incredible amount of folks that have a common need, which is that most of us are flying on small satellites that produce 1,000 to 1,500 watts each of power available to do your mission, which is about how much power your refrigerator runs on. But the modern missions we need, they really require about as much power as your house runs on, or even more than that. And so we at Starcatcher are building a system to beam power to satellites, and they will collect that power with their existing solar arrays to give them more power, to level them up from 1,000 to 4, 5, even 10,000 watts of power.
So when you do that, let's first of all talk about how the space-based energy grid works. So you talked about beaming power to an existing satellite through its existing solar arrays. And isn't there a kind of an issue with their batteries can only hold so much energy? How does it boost the amount of power that's available to the satellite for its mission?
So the way our system works is we will build a constellation of what we call power node satellites that will collect a substantial amount of solar energy and then redirect portions of that energy to client satellites. So one power node will service up to 50 or so client satellites simultaneously, and giving them the amount of power that they need, anywhere from a few hundred watts to dozens of kilowatts, at concentrations that vary from 1 sun to 5 or 10 suns of flux, again, based on their need. And what we're taking advantage of here are a couple of things. One is that solar arrays are they're photovoltaics, or what we call a band gap semiconductor. So if you send, and the way that these band gap semiconductors work is if you send, one photon within the wavelengths that to them within the wavelengths that they convert to electricity, they'll generate, a certain amount of electricity. If you send 10 times that, it'll generate about 10 times that amount of power. And so that's how we're able to give folks additional power when they need it. And the rest of the power system, is comprised of a power processing unit and a battery. The battery is really, collecting that energy and holding it for for operations, either high intensity operations, like operating a large synthetic aperture radar or a thruster, as well as operating when it's in eclipse. So we can give folks additional power when they, when they're operating, as well as just make sure that they're always, topped up, as it were.
So is it more like plugging your satellite, for lack of a better term, and I'm trying to figure this out kind of in terms that a non-engineer like me can understand. Is it sort of like plugging your satellite into a wall socket to give it more power, but it's just being beamed across space? And the other part of that is your grid, is your power grid then mobile? Does it go to the client, or is it? Do you build it in such a way that the clients are always within range of the power grid?
So, Tom, that first one's a great analogy. it really is the core here is to try to build infrastructure in space just like we have on the ground, right? Like when we went and started up Made in Space, when we went and we're integral to the formation of Redwire, when we started up Starcatcher, we didn't worry about where power was going to come to. We just had a building, we plugged into the wall and got however much power we want. That's very different than how things work in space. In space, everything is a camping trip. You got to take everything with you, and if you didn't bring it with you, you're out of luck. And that is an impediment to the commercialization, industrialization, and exploration of any arena, including space. And so that's why we're trying to build this power grid to have infrastructure, so it's just as easy to build, a business in space as it is on the ground one day. Now that's a really long-term goal, but we're going to get there one day. Now, in terms of your second question, like, hey, what does this look like? We will fly our power nodes in select orbits in low Earth orbit at about 1,500 kilometers in altitude. So we're kind of looking down at everybody in low Earth orbit, and each one of the satellites has a multi-thousand kilometer operational radius. So we will beam the power to client satellites. And when they won't, and they'll just stay in their orbits doing what doing their mission, servicing their customers. And we will direct the energy to them based on their needs. So it's really important for us to avoid kind of a chicken and the egg problem, where we don't want our customers to have to change how they operate, and we don't want them to have to fly some custom receiver. That's why we interface with their existing solar arrays, and we say, hey, just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll beam the power to you.
How is the power beamed? Is it a laser, for lack of is that basically what it is?
It's more like a flashlight, right? So we're sending energy, in the kind of visible and the near infrared spectrum. It's a multi wavelength transmitter that we have, and the reason for that is again that the solar arrays that are on most spacecraft are most ideally tuned to a more broadband reception of energy rather than just one specific wavelength.
So let's talk about some of the potential applications. Obviously, it's to keep satellites all charged up and ready to go. Are there other potential applications that you're seeing for this technology?
One of the really fun things about this company is every time we talk to a new set of customers about what we see as the use cases for it, they say, that's great. And then we also have maybe these applications over here that we haven't thought about. And so then we just kind of keep adding that. It's really inspiring in that way. But I would say the top three areas that that this is really transformational from a use case perspective are life extension, recovery, and augmentation. So life extension, just like what it sounds like, if you have a satellite that's at the end of its operational life or even beyond its operational life, but it's still flying, still generating revenue, or still providing value to an end customer. What starts to fail in the spacecraft, in terms of the power system, is usually the batteries don't hold charge as well, and the solar arrays do degrade a little bit. So if you have that experience on the ground, like let's say your cell phone, it's old and its battery's worn down. Well, what do? You as we were talking about a little bit earlier, you plug it into the wall and you just keep it plugged in.
Sure.
That's what Starcatcher actually offers folks, is to say, hey, you can just have the equivalent of plugging your satellite into shore power and keeping it flying and deferring the cost of, or deferring or avoiding the cost of replacing that spacecraft. So that's life extension. Augmentation, kind of what we've been talking about so far. Most spacecraft are purchased with a kind of standard satellite bus that has a standard amount of power for the size of it, but the payload or the mission itself often needs a lot more power, or would like to have more power to give it optionality.
Sure.
And so what we end up doing is we duty cycle the spacecraft. You turn off the image processing computer so you can run the thruster, or you can run the imager, or do your downlink, and that lowers your overall capacity to operate on the spacecraft. So what we can do is send folks additional power so they can have their revenue generating workflows running all the time, or their operationally relevant, workflows running all the time, rather than, some fraction of their orbit. This is a really big deal because there are a lot of satellites that, their uptime due to the power constraints is like, 10% or less of their overall mission. So us being able to say, hey, you can go from 10% to 100% is transformational for commercial, it's transformational for national security, it's transformational for space exploration. And then that third use case that I want to hit on just briefly is the recovery use case. So we've seen a decent number of spacecraft have a mishap on orbit where, like, one, if they have two solar arrays, maybe one doesn't pop out. And then they're in a power negative situation, and they lose the spacecraft, they lose the mission. And this has happened, happens once or twice. It's happened once or twice a year for the past several years. But for those folks, if that happens and we have the Starcatcher network built out, we can beam them additional power to keep their spacecraft in a power positive situation, so they can assess the issue and recover, or perform some of the mission or perform the entire mission. And that's something I'm really excited about, because, ultimately having that additional resiliency to enable people to deliver is really, is a really useful thing.
So, Andrew, how did you come up with this concept?
So myself and my co-founders, we've been working in the space sector for a long time. And, we end up just thinking about spacecraft and space operations in terms of swap, size, weight, and power constraints.
Sure.
If you look back over the last 5 or 10 years, the advent of low-cost launch from SpaceX and Rocket Lab and other folks has really opened the aperture on size and weight, right? The launch costs coming down, meaning we can fly bigger stuff more cheaply. But power is still really constrained. And so our opinion is that power is the next great bottleneck for space commercialization, space industrialization. And that's why we had chose to attack this particular problem. And we also looked at terrestrial applications. And terrestrially, when there's a geographic concentration of customers with a similar need, think about building out cell towers in the early 90s, for instance. Those lend themselves to shared infrastructure solutions. So much like with the cell phone tower build-outs, you had American Tower and other companies come in and really, create wonderful shared infrastructure that let, the cell phone providers of that era, spend their money elsewhere to build out their networks more efficiently. That's what we want to do for spacecraft. Say, hey, stop spending your CapEx, stop spending your money up front on power generation and or being limited by the available satellite buses, and buy power from Starcatcher once you get on orbit, so that you can have a more capable spacecraft, and you can put your upfront money in places that's more useful.
Well, congratulations on closing your seed round to $12.25 million, from what we understand. How challenging was it, Andrew, to convince investors about the viability of this concept?
It's a really interesting experience to raise money in the space sector today. It's really inspiring that there are folks that are willing to make big bets on frontier technology, on dual use technology, because that was not the case when we were building up Made in Space in the 2010s. In the 2010s, unless your name was Elon Musk or you were building a remote sensing company, you couldn't raise venture capital. Not being named Elon Musk, we had to grow Made in Space organically. But today, it's really great that they're investors. Our co-leads are Initialized Capital, which is a just really top tier early stage investor based in Silicon Valley, and B Capital, which is a just really giant, awesome, intelligent venture capital firm based in New York that is multi-stage. They invest in everything from early stage stuff through growth, through IPO. And then our third investor was a company called Rogue Capital. Really just high conviction, frontier tech, deep tech firm that all really got it and understood what we were doing. Believed in our team, believed in the addressable market, and really bought into our go-to-market strategy. And so, you talk to hundreds of people whenever you do any venture round, any investment round, but it's certainly a different era today than it was 15 years ago.
So then, how are you going to use that seed money?
So we have three main focuses for the seed round. The first is to build a really amazing engineering team to prove out the technology. And then the other two goals are centered around that, right? That team is going to build and do a series of ground demonstrations showing that we can transmit energy over long distances, that we can track our client satellites, and ultimately, do the whole closed loop system. And then the third objective is to do that in space. It's to fly a subscale demonstrator that's currently scheduled for the end of 2025, where we'll get ultimately that flight heritage on the technology.
My guest is Andrew Rush, President and CEO of Starcatcher on the Ex Terra Podcast. Take a moment right now to click subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra, the Journal of Space Commerce. Andrew, let's get into some of the details now about this space-based energy grid, and I want you to start by describing the pay-as-you-go model for satellite operators.
So traditionally, the way that we do power generation in space is that we create a power budget, and then we buy solar arrays that will generate that amount of power, or some fraction thereof, and then we duty cycle the spacecraft. And going one step further from there, you don't just buy the solar arrays. You usually buy a satellite bus that says, "Hey, I produce X amount of power for you, and if you want more, you got to spend a lot of money for engineering to make it better, non-recurring engineering, which drives your cost way up." So our solution is to offer a pay-as-you-go model to folks, where they have their standard satellite bus that, when there's one sun in the sky, generates let's call it 1,000 watts of power for them. We say, "Hey, we can actually beam you additional power, beam you additional energy, and make that 1 kilowatt satellite, a 5 kilowatt satellite, for the upfront cost of that 1 kilowatt satellite." And there, folks are just paying us just like you pay your local power utility.
Okay.
We're here in Jacksonville, so we have JEA. Folks in New York have Con Ed, and everybody else. So folks would pay us, like an annual amount. If they vary based on the amount of power they wanted, we would have kind of spot pricing. But that's the basic approach.
So how does this then compare to other satellite life extension technology? We hear a lot about, the ones that will go and plug into a satellite and move it around its orbit and refuel it, and et cetera, et cetera. How does this all compare?
So we really will be a part of the tapestry of a new way of approaching spacecraft operations. You have folks like Orbit Fab that their ambition is to be the gas station of space. So if you're a chemical thruster using hydrazine, for example, and you run out, today that means your spacecraft is out of fuel, and it's the end of your camping trip. Tomorrow you call up Orbit Fab and they can give you more fuel, and you can continue, just like you're using Exxon today on the ground for your cars. Folks like Northrop Grumman and their mission extension vehicles, kind of like they have little jetpacks they plug into the back of your spacecraft and kind of do the same thing. Hey, if you're out of fuel, they keep you flying for longer by attaching something new to your spacecraft. We're a little bit unique in that the model here is more of a continuous service model. And a continuous augmentation model for folks, and we're unique in that we're not necessarily like attaching something directly to your spacecraft or maneuvering and docking with it. But if we look out 10 or 15 years from now, I believe what we're going to see is a transition to a world where satellites are more like, kind of permanent fixtures in space, just like, industrial parks are on the Earth,
Mm-hmm.
where we're you add to them, you rebuild them, you augment them, you maintain them, versus today where it's kind of a one and done deployment.
Have you anticipated any particular technical challenges, and do you have plans to address some of those so far?
Yeah, so I hate to use the cliche, but space is hard.
I've heard that.
and so certainly when we look at when we look at our spacecraft design, when we look at our architecture, we break it down into 3 or 4 main subsystems, and each one of those subsystems, we've demonstrated in a subscale environment, like in the lab, and we have a growing team that's attacking each one of those, and refining it, and perfecting it, and then ultimately we'll integrate those together. It is one of these areas where you have a trade space, and you say, hey, there's like 4 different ways to do this thing, and you kind of just tick through those, and then execute going forward. But I'm a big believer that your business model shouldn't require you to like win a Nobel Prize in order for it to close, and ours doesn't.
Any particular safety concerns you've come across?
It's a great question. And there are folks flying today that use what we call a laser communications terminals, so
Mm-hmm.
they're sending tight beam lasers between different spacecraft to transmit data. In many ways, we're just like them. We're just kind of turning the gain up to provide energy. So it's we have a very narrow band, or kind of narrow gauge, thin pipe basically of light that we're transmitting from our spacecraft to our client spacecraft. And we will take steps to do the conjunction analyses for that light beam to make sure that, other folks we're not inadvertently, shining our light on other folks when as we're powering our client spacecraft. But beyond that, there aren't too many unique safety challenges for us.
What about regulatory or public policy issues?
So that's an area that when we started off, one of the early conversations we had was with folks, in DC, and said, hey, this is what we're interested in building, and here's
Right.
why, and here's our concept of operations, and here's what we plan to do with, to avoid inadvertently shining light on other spacecraft. And everyone was very, very receptive about those things. We will be subject to all the tapestry of regulations that apply to any spacecraft. Your FCCs, your FAAs, your NOAAs, and we'll prosecute that those approvals as we get closer to first our demo flight and then our commercial operations.
When we often hear about space solar power, we hear about companies that are working on building a constellation that would then beam the power back down to Earth. And I know that's not your initial business model, but is that something that your team is looking at maybe at some point in the future?
So I'm a big like sci-fi fan, as you can tell from the art behind me, and space-based solar power is always part of some big build out, right?
Sure.
And so at some point, I do hope that we will see space to ground, space-based solar power become a reality. I think from a use case perspective, it really only makes sense to, in the next decade or so, in servicing like really austere environments. So forward operating bases, settlements in Antarctica, or settlements in really,
Mm-hmm.
really remote areas, where the cost model, that's the only place I really see the cost model working for that. One of the things that we are excited about with Starcatcher is once you have a fully built out constellation, there are emergent use cases for for the 10 or 20% capacity that isn't used consistently. One of those may very well be beaming power down, maybe to UAVs, beaming power down to some of those, some of those austere environments. And certainly 10 or 15 years from now, when as launch costs continue to come down, as the servicing and assembly manufacturing companies come online more, we'll see the cost of those services shift, and maybe we will be in a world where we have Soletas and power sets that power us here on the ground.
So given all that, why should the public care?
Yeah, this is a fundamental step in the commercialization and industrialization of space. Like, if we think about the difference between the Wild West and California today, it fundamentally comes down to roads and power and data. So in space, the roads are rockets. The data are telecommunication satellites, and the power is Starcatcher. So we're part of this just fundamental triumvirate of infrastructure that I believe will enable us to commercialize and industrialize space. Like, I'm a big believer of manufacturing space and of using space to protect national and global security, and to help us understand the cosmos and explore. And I personally would like to take a vacation to space one day. And I think in order for us to do those things more, or to do those things at all, we need infrastructure, first in low Earth orbit, and then pushing out further and further.
What drove that interest for you personally? How did you get involved in this new space arena?
So I am the son of two Georgia Tech chemical engineers.
So you come by it honestly.
I come by it honestly. That's right. My mother was a physics and chemistry high school teacher, so I was raised on this steady diet of Star Trek and science fiction and science fact. So I come by it honestly.
Tell me a little bit about your team. Who are you working with? Who are some of those key players?
So I have two other co-founders, Mike Snyder, who I have worked with for, I think, over a decade now. He was the chief engineer and one of the co-founders at Made in Space, and he was the chief technology officer at Redwire. So we've been working together for a long time. He's just an absolutely brilliant individual. He's got 50 plus patents on fundamental in space manufacturing and satellite technologies. So it's really exciting to be doing this with him. And then Brian Lionberg is our other co-founder. Brian has a really amazing background as a venture capitalist, as well as he was also an operator at Amazon, running a pretty large P&L there for a while. So we have so we really complement each other quite nicely, the three of us. And then we have a couple other folks that we've brought on from an early stage that that we worked with previously at Made in Space or Redwire, as well as a couple of earlier career folks that we're at University of North Florida and that have been working with us here today. And then we're growing. We're actively hiring, looking to build out that team, looking for great optics engineers, great systems engineers, as well as people who just say, hey, like, this is really inspiring, and I have a little bit of experience or passion about the space industry, about satellites, and they want to join.
And we can say from experience that Northeast Florida is a pretty good place to be. That's if you're looking for a job.
That's right. That's right. We sometimes we get asked the question, like, well, why are you building a space company in Jacksonville rather than Texas or California or Colorado? And what I tell people is look, like, the space sector is one where people that want to go in it, they know that they're going to move somewhere. There's not just like a concentration. It's not like SAS, where where you got to move to Silicon Valley in order to really find a job. so it's really distributed. Obviously, we're here close to Cape Canaveral, but Jacksonville is great, right? Like our cost of living is better than all those places I just listed. We have a river, we have a beach, we have a good football team right now, which is which we couldn't always say, and we have
you better hedge that just a little bit, Andrew.
right now,
Oh, as a long-suffering Jaguars fan, yeah, we'll do that. I just a couple of more questions for you. And one of them, you mentioned often Redwire, and people may not know that you sold Made in Space to Redwire. What went through your mind when you got that phone call as an entrepreneur that said, "I think I finally made it"?
Yeah, it is a really interesting process to sell the company that you've built up, right? Like when I joined Made in Space, we were about a dozen folks, and like this literally dusty part of a facility out in the NASA Ames Research Park campus in Mountain View, California. And by the time we sold, we started talking to Redwire. We were 140 folks. We had offices, our main facility had been moved here to Florida. We had a few folks still in California. We had folks and we also had folks in Luxembourg and a few other places. So we really expanded the company and footprint and everything. And honestly, we felt really deeply that, we had a lot of gas in the tank still at Made in Space, that we had a lot of like upside and potential. But we also were very excited about the partnership and being a part of something bigger that would enable us to have a broader reach, and to have the additional resources to drive that vision forward. And so I'm really proud of what we built at Made in Space, and I'm honestly really proud of what we were able to accomplish at Redwire and what that team that we were able to be the core of is accomplishing today.
You've alluded to this a couple of times over the course of the interview, Andrew, but we ask this of all of our guests, and that's to look out over the next 10 to 15 years in space commerce and your role in that, and tell me what you see.
Yeah, I really hope, I really believe deeply that what we are building here is key to that commercialization and industrialization of space. And we are sitting here today in kind of to mix metaphors, like the early innings of the second golden age of space. The first golden age of space, the Apollo era, driven by really like national pride, basically, as well as like the military industrial complex. And today we still have those things. Those are big parts of the space sector, but we also have this commercial driver that is letting us that's driving us to do new and interesting things that we wouldn't necessarily have done just based on those old motivations. And that's what I want to, help the world realize the maximum potential of. And I think that power being a fundamental marker of civilization, of infrastructure, of industrialization, we need more of that. We need it to be more widely available. We need it to be easy to access. So in 10 or 15 years, I hope that we're producing just, tens of megawatts of power, hundreds of megawatts of power for folks, both in low Earth orbit, and even out to the moon and beyond, and that we see this virtuous cycle of commercial and government operations to enable us to be, living and working permanently on the moon, to be enabling commercial space stations that are operating, manufacturing in space, and all of our phones just constantly talking to satellites in addition to, cell towers on the ground.
Andrew, we're out of time, but I really want to say that I appreciate your time today, and it's been a fascinating conversation. Good luck with the company, and we'll look forward to keeping track of what's going on and seeing how you get this, if you'll pardon this pun, off the ground.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Andrew Rush is the president and CEO of Starcatcher. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click on subscribe so you don't miss any of our podcasts or any of our other videos. You can get daily updates on space commerce by subscribing to the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack at www.xterrajsc.com. And one thing more, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on X at xterrajsc. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna go faster, faster. Hands in the air, we're gonna crash. Searching for the answers, my Galileo through his looking glass. Thirst for reason, a dreamer's eyes we gaze into. A sense of purpose, know my view. Like finding one